Hello and welcome back to my workshop. Project for today is an Edgelit clock. I'm starting by making the base. This is the bottom part of the base. It consists of two parts. This is the second part. It will end up placed on top, and then there'll be a sheet of perspex with a clock in it going on there. It'll be lit up from the bottom. So I'm starting by making the base. At the moment I have chucked up in the router a 2.5mm drill, and it's going to start by drilling a few pilot holes for some screws, and we'll proceed from there. The drill will be run at a low speed, that way the drill works a lot better. If you try running drill bits at high speed, they just don't work, not in wood anyway. They tend to burn the wood rather than actually drill it. If you run the router cutter slowly, it drills very nicely, so we'll get started on this. I'm now going to switch the cutter to a 6mm cutter. And I'm just going to zero it off the table by eye, basically. When I can no longer see light going underneath the cutter, I know that it's on the table. Right, the cutter's at the right height now, and I'm going to call that -19, which is the thickness of my stock. I'll be turning the speed on the router up a bit here. I'm not using dust extraction. There's going to be wood chips for miles here, but it'll better illustrate what's going on. There we have the finished base. I left 0.5mm of material sitting on the bottom here, and as you can see, that's got quite enough holding power to hold the piece in place. I seem to have the holding clamps on nice and tight, which is always a good idea. You don't want these things coming adrift. Right, and as you can see, it breaks off quite easily, like so. Right, we'll do a bit of a clean up on this. Right, we're about to start the clean up of our piece we've cut. We've got our slot in here. It's already clean inside. Just need to go around the edges here and put a nice edge on them, and then we'll finish that up on putting a bevel on with the router table. I've just put new sandpaper on the disc here, so that's really going to cut quickly, so I have to make sure I keep it moving, and it should clean up the edges nicely. Right, that does a really nice job on these edges here. You get really nice end grain. I'll take it over to the workbench and give it a bit more of a sand. Right, we'll just give the edges a nice light sand now. Thinking I'll stain this here a nice dark Remu colour, so I really need good end grain there, and as you can see, that sander I used before really does bring the grain up on it with minimal effort. Well, I still need to put a bevel on these edges here, so I'm going to take it over to the router table and give that a go. Right, so I'm quite pleased with the way the edges came up on the router there. I'll just give the face another sand, some fine paper just around those edges. It's not going to take much just to finish it off there. The edges came up very nicely, and likewise on the bottom, just another light sand on the bottom. Those edges. Right, well that's half of our base done. We'll start on the next piece. Right, here we are about to start the top piece this time. This one's a bit easier to cut. It's all cut with the one cutter. I'm just using a 3mm up spiral cutter. So we'll start our cutting. Right, well I've now been and sanded up the top piece, the same as I did for the bottom. And I'm just going to do a dry fit of this together. I have here the lights that I'll be using in the base. They are red in colour, or at least that's what it says on the packet anyway. Just get this out of here. And if I've measured everything right, this pre-wired plug here will just drop through, take the nut off, the hole in the base. Should just go through, come out the other end. And these lights should just drop into this groove here, which they do. Our top then goes on here, and at the same time I sanded this here, I also just countersunk these holes, the pilot holes that were made by the CNC. These screws should now line up nicely with those holes there. We'll quickly screw it together. Like I said, this is just a dry run. Make sure it all works and fits together. Plug power into the LEDs and they're all running good. Every one of them is lit. And I have here an Edgelit sign that I did earlier on in the year, and as you can see, once it's plugged in there, it lights the sign up. So that's really good. I'm pleased with that. So next we'll disassemble it and start the staining. Right, well I'm about to apply some stain to my wood. I'm going to be using a resin colour wood stain. This is water-based stain. I find it quite good. And I'm going to be applying it with a sponge. Now the sponge I've already wet. It's damp. It's not stopping wet. It's just damp. I've squeezed all the water out of it. But I find it seems to work better with a damp sponge. I've got a brush here just in case I need it, because I'm going to want to get it down inside this groove here, which I'm not going to be able to do with a sponge. So I'll start with this piece first. I'm going to take a little bit of stain. I'm just going to rub it right into that groove. See if I can get a good coating in there to start with. It's actually quite difficult to get in there, so I'll just try to get a good coating in there. Right. I'll just brush this here out. I'll get my sponge now, just dip it in the stain, and I'll just start to brush out the stain, get it basically looking the way I want it to look. Right guys, well the stains now had been sitting overnight, had a chance to dry off there, and it's looking quite good. So now I need to put some sort of a finish on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a water-based polyurethane. And I'm going to use the same sponge I used for the staining, and just wipe it on basically. Well, you don't sort of get brush marks with it. So it's just a matter of wiping it on like this. It's a nice easy way of putting a varnish on. Good thing about this as well is it dries quickly, so you can give it many coats very quickly, get a good build up on it. Let's get that round there, I won't worry about the bottom at this stage. Just rub it on. I'll just put it up on some blocks. Better for wiping around it. This is also a non-glossy varnish as well, so imperfections in the finish don't show up like they do with gloss varnishes. Just give it a coating. I'll also put this one up on blocks. Right, I'll let that dry and then I'll apply another coat. Right, it's now time to cut the perspex. I'm just letting my bases dry, and what I've done is I've put a 30-degree cutter in here. I usually keep the little rubber piece on until I'm ready to cut, because these cutters are wickedly sharp, and if you get your hand too close to them it'll usually draw blood. So I just keep the little rubber cover on it until I'm ready to start cutting. Right, we'll begin the file. Right, the lettering is now being cut. Sorry, the video camera battery went flat as I was cutting it, so you only got to see a small portion of it. Now, I've changed the cutter to a 3mm upcutting spiral, 2 flute. We'll get this thing cut. Well, that's cut it very nicely. I'm very pleased with the cut. We'll move the cutter away now. And see what our piece looks like. Right, just missed a bit of plastic on the bottom there. That's a very nice smooth edge there. And the engraving looks very nice as well. We'll have to wait until I peel the paper off to see how it's actually come out, but before I do that I actually have to drill this hole here for the clock. Now that the perspex engraving is cut, I need to make a small 4-inch disc of white perspex. This is going to go behind the clock so that you can't see through the perspex to the clock, and also will allow the hands of the clock to show up against give it a background to show up against. Since the hands of the clock are black, white is just perfect. This is just some 4.5mm perspex I use for making lithophanes out of. and other things. For this clock though, I only need it to be 2mm thick, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a pocket, machine it down to 2mm thick, and cut out my disc. Right, now comes the exciting part, the assembly. When you weren't looking, I drilled a 7mm hole in this piece here and a 9.5mm hole in the centre of this here, and I'll show you why later. Well, we're going to start with the base. First part is to put some little rubber feet on the base. And we'll just hold it up off the ground. Let's try to get it lined up. Right, I've just cleared the hole, and that feeds through there. I just drilled, ran an 11mm drill through by hand just to clear any varnish that got down into that groove. Now my LED light set we tested earlier fits in there nicely. You can see the reason for the feet now, so the wire can come out the bottom. And we will screw the top piece on here. Right, so I'll just plug our base in here. And we should see it light up. That's excellent. That's all lit up nicely. We can now move on to the perspex and the clock. The engraving I did here is done inverted, so that's because we'll be looking through the perspex at the engraving. So I'm just going to pull off the plastic now. Like so. That looks pretty good. I'll just have to go through and remove all the little bits of plastic in between. Can be a bit time consuming, especially if you've got a lot of fiddly letters. Up here is not bad, but when you get down into these small letters down here, it can take a wee while. Right, I've now removed all the little bits of perspex from inside the clock here. Now, just a word of warning to anybody doing this and they're using perspex with paper on it, like this one here. There's nothing wrong with that, but if you're doing something like this and it's fiddly, it pays to actually remove the paper on the side you're engraving before you start, because removing paper from something like this is no fun at all. Now I'll just remove the paper from this here. When when it's done as a full piece, there's no problem, but when you have to start taking little bits out of places like this here, it can just take forever. Now I'm going to put the machine side here down facing the viewer, because that will actually look the best. Now here's my clock mechanism. It's only a cheap one. Well, they all pretty much sell for $3 or $4 bucks. I think this one was about $5, and it comes with a kit of pieces, which we'll just tip out here. So we've got our minute hand, our second hand, and our hour hand. Also comes with a rubber washer, and this little insert washer here is nut, which will go on the front. Now it has a flange on the outside of it. That's 9.5 millimeters in diameter. That's why I drilled the 9.5 millimeter hole there. So I'm just going to put this here on here. This goes onto there. Just got to be careful there's no rubbish in between. See, it goes through there. And we want to be careful we don't want to scratch our perspex. So I'm just going to pull back perspex like that, the paper, or should I say the plastic, like that. And I can start, I need to press the insert in here, like so. And I can gently wind the clock on. Just there it goes. I want to hold this piece here so it doesn't spin. Clock in there nice and tight. Fortunately, it's not quite in the right place. Put it like that. Okay, that's our clock on there. Next we put our hands on. The hour hand goes straight up vertical like that. The minute hand directly on top of that, and finally the second hand on top of that, all on a line. Well, here's the clock all put together. I'm very pleased with the way it came out, and I'm just stoked with the fact that I chose to stain the base a dark brown colour. It just looks a lot better than it would have if I'd left it white pine looking. The engravings come out beautifully. It's all cleanly cut. The clock shows up very nicely. Unfortunately, there were no scratches on the perspex that I hadn't seen, as sometimes it can get damaged and you just don't see it through the plastic coating. The video you're seeing, it looks a little bit dull in colour, but when you're standing next to it, it's very nice, very dark reddish colour. So the video is not sort of showing that very accurately. But there we have it, the completed clock. Rightio, well, we'll catch you later, guys. Bye.